It has been 1 calendar year since Microsoft released their follow-up to the Surface Duo, the Surface Duo 2. In this video, I'm going to talk about what the experience is 1 year later, and to do this, I'm going to be referencing my original review, which was published about a year ago. So we're going to be bouncing back and forth. When you see the black and white stuff, that's going to be the old review. I'm going to kind of be commenting on what I thought then and how it has maybe changed or not changed now. The first thing I'm going to do in this video might be a little bit telling as to what my thoughts are and where I'm going to be going with this, because the first thing I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to take my SIM back out of my Z Fold 4 and put it into the Surface Duo 2. I've been bouncing back and forth between devices a lot. My Pixel 7 Pro, my Z Fold 4, my Duo 2, for different reasons, to review the Pixel, to test the One UI 5 beta here, needed to go back in here. But I keep being drawn back to Duo 2. I keep wanting to come back to this device, back to my dual screen phone, and I think maybe that will kind of put you in the right headspace for where my head is at in regard to this phone. So let's pop these SIMs out. Unfortunately, on the Fold, you actually have to take that off to get to your SIM, which is a little bit annoying. All right, there you go. The SIM has been moved over. Now we can get into some business here. So at the risk of maybe sounding redundant, I do want to quickly go over the hardware of Duo 2. Some people may have just forgotten what the hardware was. Some people maybe never knew in the first place. Maybe you're looking at this thing as a new device and you want to know how far behind it actually is. So let's take a look at the hardware now. This is Surface Duo 2. It is one of the most unique and strangest looking smartphones on the market. It's very, very recognizable with its just the form factor that it is in. We have two 5.8-inch displays that run at 90 hertz. A lot of times when you look this thing up online, it'll say that the screen is 8.3 inches. For some reason, they're measuring diagonally across both screens. That does not really make sense to me. It's 5.8 inches from there to there. That is the size of the screens. They are covered with Corning Gorilla Glass Victus, 401 ppi pixel density. I think that they're both very solid looking screens. I just tried to double tap to wake, and that is not a thing that functions on this device. Of course, you will notice that these screens are both very, very wide. They are shorter, not necessarily shorter, but they're definitely wider than your average screen. So this is something that you're going to have to actually get used to. You'll have to decide if this is something that you like or not. When you look at something like the Z Fold 4 or a more normal screen, it is definitely a different form factor. For me and for people like myself, a lot of us really like that wider screen, but again, that is something that's going to be preferential. We do have 8 gigs of RAM here running the Snapdragon 888 processor. This is the 128 gig variant, and this thing still does perform quite well. That processor is still quite fast, definitely fast enough. The act of opening and closing apps is just as fast and as fluid now as it ever has been, and after this Android 12 update, the animations do actually feel even smoother and nicer than they did before. Yes, it will score slower on a Geekbench benchmark than something like the Z Fold 4 might, but you're not going to notice that in day-to-day use. This thing, the Snapdragon 888, is still plenty fast enough. In terms of this rather large camera bump on the back, we do have a 12 megapixel standard, a 12 megapixel 2x telephoto, and a 16 megapixel ultra wide, as well as a time of flight sensor for portrait mode. We will talk about this camera setup and how the performance is a little bit more in depth later. There is also a 12 megapixel selfie camera on the inside. Stereo speakers, one is going to be up here and one is down here, which may seem a little bit weird, but when, you know, basically any posture you're in, you're still going to have stereo sound. If you're like this, you have stereo sound. If you rotate this way, you have stereo sound. If you're in phone mode, you have stereo sound. There's always going to be stereo sound, so that actually makes a lot of sense to have it in that particular configuration. There is a side-mounted fingerprint scanner that is built into the power button, as well as a volume rocker there above that. The screens do curve ever so slightly around the inside, and one reason for that is the glance bar. You're actually able to see notifications on the spine of this device. If I actually, let's go to some music that I will have playing, and I'll show you kind of how that looks. When you're changing the volume, you're actually going to be able to see it rise and fall right there on the spine of the device. You'll also be able to receive, like I said, notifications for text messages, emails, things like that right there on the spine, should that be something you want to take advantage of. If you don't know, Surface Duo is a dual screen device. This is not a folding AMOLED display, something like the Galaxy Z Fold line. This is an actual two separate screens separated by a hinge down the middle. And that is because this is not trying to be a pocketable tablet. No, instead, what this is trying to be is it's trying to be something that replicates the dual monitor setup that so many of us do use at our house or at our place of work. Some people are good using one monitor in front of them, using one screen in front of them. Some of us like to have two monitors, as I have here. And so by virtue of that, having two monitors on my mobile device makes a lot of sense. Honestly, nothing's changed from a year on, and even from 2 years on, going back to the original Surface Duo. This is still exactly the same for me. I just got done using my Z Fold 4, which I have turned off for a while. I've gone back and forth, the Z Fold 2, now I'm using the Z Fold 4. The same thing is true, okay? These are two very different devices. This is an Android tablet that can fold up, and yes, it can do multitasking, and it can do a lot of cool stuff in terms of multitasking. But it is not a dual screen phone, and the way that they behave, the things that you do with them, the way that your workflow works on a dual screen device versus a folding tablet is just going to be different. And in my prior review, I kind of talked about this a bit, and I'll talk about it a bit here as well, because I think that it's really important, as a lot of people have been deciding, do you want to buy the Fold, do you want to buy Duo? And there's reasons to buy the Fold, right? This is all subjective, but I'm going to very quickly kind of tell you why I think I prefer Duo over the Fold. So I'll go over this as quickly, as succinctly as I possibly can, but basically this is it. On Duo, if I want to launch Twitter, I launch Twitter. If I want to launch a second app, all I have to do is go over to my launcher or go into my app drawer, whatever I want to do. It's the same exact process to launch the second app, and boom, there is the second app. If I do the same thing here on the Z Fold 4, can launch Twitter, great, there it is. But then if I want to turn around and launch the Play Store, I need to go into my app drawer here, and I need to look for the Google Play Store, and then I need to drag it over. Some people might tell you, hey, that is a very skinny looking couple of apps. That's true, although you can rotate the Z Fold, and at that point, it is a pretty similar look to what we have on the Z Fold 4. And in fact, you can also open multiple apps over here. You can open up more applications. So let's go and open up YouTube in a floating window. Let's do YouTube Music down here in another window. Maybe that's something that is really important to you. You really love having a whole bunch of apps open at once. To me, I find this to be kind of more of a gimmick and not very useful. It kind of gets crowded and the apps get really, really small. To me, two apps is kind of the sweet spot to be in. But there's more than just the fact that it is just simply factually easier to open two apps over here because it's the same process. I know that it's easy here. I'm not saying that it's hard. This is the second best multitasking phone on planet Earth. This is just simply the best as far as I'm concerned. There's more to this though. Let's say over here I've gone into an app in the Google Play Store, and now I'm scrolling through Twitter and I want to go back in the Play Store. If I come over here and swipe back, I'm going to go back on Twitter. In fact, I've closed Twitter out. That's because navigation is not independent of the app over here. On Duo, it is. Let's do the same thing. Let's go into an application. Let's go into Walmart. And now I'm scrolling through Twitter. And now let's go back. I go back on the Play Store because it's like it's two separate phones. Over here, it's what was the last used app. Over here, it's what screen are you on. There's more though. Let's go into Twitter. Let's go to type a tweet. See how the keyboard is only on that screen. It's not occluding this screen for no good reason. Let's go get Twitter back open over here. Let's drag it back over and we'll do the same thing. If we go to do a tweet, you're going to see that the keyboard, if I can do this, occludes the other app. It covers up everything. Now you can do a floating keyboard, right? And you can drag it into place over here. There's a way to drag this thing. There it is. That's fine. It's a little janky to have to keep managing your keyboard, whereas over here, I don't have to do that because the keyboard is just going to follow the app that it is functioning with, but that's a problem. It's the independent behavior of the two applications for me. Like I said, I won't spend too much longer on this. I've already made an entire video on it, so as succinctly as I can, I just feel like the experience on Surface Duo and Duo 2 specifically to this video, that multitasking experience is just more native. It's more built in. It's easier. It's simpler. Typing is simpler because it's not covering up half of what you're doing. They can both multitask, and you might argue that Fold can multitask better in some regards, but in terms of just ease of flow, ease of use, it's just better to me on Duo 2. Again, if you want to see more about this, there's a whole video. I'll link to it in the description. So earlier on in this video, I mentioned the stereo speaker configuration on Duo 2. The fact there's one speaker there and one speaker there. And that kind of leads me into the next area of where I think Duo 2 is very strong, and that relates to postures. With Duo 2, there's many different ways you can actually use the device. You can have it in book mode like this, using 2 apps at once. You can go into phone mode and use only 1 app at a time, more like a standard phone. You can have it in compose mode, where you can actually have a full screen keyboard and type on one side. You can have it in tint mode, where it's set up like this, where you do not need any sort of kickstand. When I use my Fold 4, I have to wear a case that has a kickstand on it. And you might argue that with a screen this size and some really nice speakers and a kickstand, that this might be the better viewing experience. But in my mind, I always still kind of prefer being able to do it on Duo 2 because it's just a little bit easier. I'm not having to fiddle around with that kickstand. If I want to watch a video, I simply launch the video, I go full screen, and I do that, and I'm done. And you have all these different angles. You can have it at, you can have it straight up and down, have it angled down like that, and they're all going to work really well. It's just super simple. It's built in. It doesn't add any bulk to the device. It's just part of how the device actually functions. And when you talk about the speakers, they're better than people would probably think that they are. Let's play a sample here. Let me move my microphone over. We'll play a quick sample at max. For CX file. We'll play a quick sample here at maximum volume. And I think you can hear there that the speakers are pretty good. They're not quite as good as the Z Fold 4, right? The Fold 4 is a little bit more bass, a little bit more clarity, but they're really, really quite solid. And because of those speakers, any orientation you're in, you're going to get stereo sound. Media consumption on Duo 2 is actually a really, really strong point because of these things that I have just mentioned, because of these postures, because of the speaker. This is a large screen, right? It's a little bit of a weird aspect ratio, but even still, the stuff you're watching on it is going to appear quite large, and it's just an experience that I really enjoy. You may think that, yeah, you've got your Fold 4 there. Of course, this is a better media consumption device, but I'm going to tell you that in my experience, it's really not that much better, and in some ways, I do prefer Duo. So a big problem that the original Surface Duo had actually was involving the Bluetooth audio quality and range. I do want to let everybody know that that problem is not present on Surface Duo 2. So this point I think needs to be amended a little bit. The problem is nowhere near as bad as it was on Surface Duo 1 for me, but I have still had a few issues after this with Bluetooth with certain earbuds. Most earbuds that I use are fine. Phone's in the pocket, earbuds are in the ear, and everything's okay. What will happen every now and again, right? If my phone's in my front left pocket, maybe I turn like this, and maybe the right bud is the primary, and then my body is between my phone and the earbud, I'll have a little cutout there for just a split second here and there. Or perhaps I'm in a very busy area with lots of Bluetooth interference. Maybe there's a little cutout here and there. It is not a huge problem for me. It's not something that happens even every time I wear the earbuds. It might happen, if I'm really heavily using my earbuds, it might happen once a day if I've been wearing them a lot that particular day. Not too big of a deal, but it definitely is still present. The Bluetooth signal just isn't very strong on Duo 2. It's not as bad as on Duo 1, but it is still there. Speaking of the edges of this device, there were some durability concerns coming off of the first one. I'll show you now how that might have been addressed. So on the original Surface Duo, the USB-C port right there would crack. Now compared to the Duo 2, we are 1 year in, and while there is some material being lost from the top here, like there's almost like a surface layer peeling a little bit, but a year in, my USB-C port has not broken in the same way that my Surface Duo 1 USB port did in fact break, so that is a good thing. In terms of overall durability, I have no complaints with Duo 2. I've daily driven this thing the majority of the time that I've had it. I've dropped it a couple of times. I've accidentally picked it up and thrown it across the room. I did it just the other day. I threw it, I reckon that'd be about 3.5 feet across the room, and it hit the leg of a table, and there was absolutely no damage to it. I do have the official bumpers on it, but this thing does seem to be a bit more durable than the original Duo. My original Duo is cracked, and that is because I dropped it from actually a lower height, and the back glass did shatter. No such problems on Duo 2. It is still not going to be a super duper durable device. You're not going to treat this thing like it's some sort of rugged device, if you will, but it's going to be durable enough, and when you're considering the fact that it's not using a folding OLED screen, should be a little bit harder to scratch and a little bit harder to break than some of those devices. So we talked about a lot, but we haven't talked about maybe you would call the elephant in the room. That is that very large camera bump on the back. A lot of people, when they went from no camera bump to camera bump on Duo, got really upset, which I understand, right? Being able to go into phone mode with no wedge shape there, just folding flush, was a really, really cool thing. And on Duo 2, you're giving that up, okay? When you're in phone mode, you do have a bit of a wedge shape. This will bother some of you more than it may bother others. For me, it's really not a big deal at all. I use this thing in phone mode a fair amount, and it's not a big deal. You may be different. This may bother you a lot, and you may think, well, having that camera bump is just not worth that. For me, it absolutely is. The camera on Duo 2 is pretty darn good at this point, and it has actually improved dramatically since my earlier review. In particular, with the shutter speed. So let's look at a quick video now that will show off that shutter speed, and then we're going to look at some photo samples and also talk about just the act of taking pictures with such a strange device. Alright, so let's go ahead and close every open app here so that we can get a really nice look at how quick this camera app is to launch. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a bunch of pictures here so you can see what that shutter lag is like, and you can see that there pretty much isn't a shutter lag to talk about. Now you may be saying, hey, the picture didn't show up on the left there for a couple of seconds, but that's not really what we're talking about. That's actually how fast the picture processes, not how fast the photo is actually taken. Let's delete these really quickly. And what we're going to do is let's point up at this tree here. Let's snap a picture. Let's go to our wide angle, and you'll see a little bit of a stutter there. Let's snap another picture. Let's go into our 2x, and there is some weird not smoothness while going in, switching lenses like that while pictures are processing. So do expect a little bit of lack of smoothness switching lenses on Duo 2, but the overall act of taking pictures is very, very fast. So as you can see, one big advantage that Duo has is a real lack of shutter lag. It's basically a zero shutter lag camera most of the time. Now when you get into low light, this is true of most cameras, there is some shutter lag that is brought in there as it tries to capture more light. We'll talk about low light photography here in a little bit, but broadly speaking, okay, I was outside for that. So maybe you're thinking, well, okay, yeah, you're outside, but like what about inside where it's a little bit darker? Okay, so like we're looking down at a table. I'll even turn my overhead light off. This is what you're going to be dealing with. It's still very, very fast, okay? So as long as the low light mode has not engaged, you are still going to be dealing with essentially a zero shutter lag type of situation with this device. Now actually, the act of taking photos on Duo is going to be a little bit different because it is a dual screen device. And like you just saw in that video, camera's over here, last picture taken is going to be over there, and you can actually scroll through those images on this other side. I really like this. How often do you take a picture and then you need to open up the picture to see if you got the shot that you wanted? Well, you don't have to do that here because it's just going to pop up right here on the other screen nice and easy. You do have some other, ways you can do things though, right? So if you want to have just the camera and not a second app open, you can do that. Just drag it over onto one screen, and then there you go. And you can actually have another thing going on over here should you want to do that. I don't know why you would, but you can if you want to span the app to get that view back again. One of the things I've actually talked about a couple times with using Duo 2 that is a little bit weird is basically this. So I take pictures of the sky with some regularity, and when you're taking a picture of the sky, what you wind up doing is you're doing this thing, right? You're holding it up and you're pointing it at the sky, and that by virtue of that, you're looking into the sun, into potentially not necessarily the sun. Don't look at the sun, that's a bad idea, but you're looking into the sky, it's probably somewhat bright, and you're looking up like that. I have some photosensitive problems, so I don't like looking at bright things, okay? So what I do with my Duo, and it's something only really Duo can do, is this. I take the camera app and I drag it onto the bottom screen, and then I bend this up so that I am now looking up at the sky with the camera, but I'm looking down at my viewfinder. And so by doing that, I'm just kind of doing this. I'm taking a picture of the sky, and I can kind of do what I need to do right there on the screen, and I'm not looking into the sun or anything. So that for me is a weird use case, but it's a use case that I actually really, really like to have. Now, of course, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that taking photos on Duo is as easy as it is on another device. I can pull my Z Fold 4 out of my pocket, double click the power button, and I am taking a picture very, very quickly. With Duo 2, you have to pull the thing out and open it up and double click the power button, and you're just kind of a two-handed device at that point. So that is going to be a bit more difficult. That is absolutely going to be the case. One-handed photography versus very, very likely going to be a two-handed photography situation. Now, you do have the ability to set it up in compose mode, have your own little tripod there, so there are some advantages to this form factor, but there are also disadvantages, and you have to weigh those yourself and determine which one is going to outweigh the other. For me, The experience on Duo, it can be clumsy sometimes, but it can also be fun to use, and the output is actually way, way, way better than people are going to lead you to believe. Let's take a second now and we'll look at some sample images. Now the pictures I just took of the tree, I accidentally deleted them before they've been Google Photos backed up. They're gone, so I had to run out and take them again. So they're not exactly the same as they were before. End of the day, pictures are going to be relatively similar. Let's take a look at them. So this is that first shot of the tree, and I accidentally took these pictures in 16:9 instead of 4:3 because, spoiler alert, I actually take a lot of my thumbnail images with Surface Duo 2, and no one would have ever noticed had I not told them, and shooting in 16:9 is easier for thumbnails, so I forgot to change it back for this. Anywho, let's zoom in here and let's look at some of these qualities because I think it's pretty good. This is in shadow, right? Yet the colors are there. The details are pretty good. It looks pretty good. Let's go up into the leaves here. Let's let this clear up on Google Photos. And I think it does a pretty good job, right? The shadows aren't being totally crushed. We're not super overexposed. Some of these spots are pretty high in exposure, but every phone I have does this. Let's go to the next image, which I believe was the wide angle. And this is a pretty good wide angle as well. Same thing. Shadows are there. The colors look nice and natural, not oversaturated like some other phones. It's a pretty serviceable picture. And on the telephoto, same deal. We look pretty good. We're really in a similar range as something like my Z Fold 4, despite it being a 3x telephoto. It actually holds up really, really well. Let's look at some other pictures I took prior. Here's one that was taken in sort of a lower light situation. This was in an evening, and you can see some of the weaknesses coming out here as we go into some of the darker areas. There's a little bit of grain here, right? That does absolutely happen, and I would recommend that you use a Gcam port for any low light photography because it makes a really big difference. But even still, this is a passable image to me. Out in some nicer lighting with portrait mode turned on, it does a really solid job. This is an image where I zoomed in like really, really far. I wish I could remember exactly how far I had zoomed, but it was way past 2x, and it did pretty good. Like, it's not amazing, but the quality there is pretty solid. A nice picture of sort of almost near the sunset. Again, in some lower light, you do get a little bit of grain as this loads in showing up there, but it's really not that bad. This is a pretty serviceable image. And if you want to talk about the benefits of having low shutter lag, let me show you something. So this will be a story told in several images as Rose had first arrived at the house. Taking a picture of this dandelion here, and it did a really good job, right? That's some really good detail here on this dandelion. Let's go to the next picture where Rose has arrived and is investigating the first dandelion she's likely ever seen. And it's a little bit out of focus, but this is a puppy. She's moving, right? Everything in this picture was moving. The next picture, she's getting a better whiff of it. Still moving around looking at this thing. She decides she wants to try and taste the dandelion, and in all of this movement, the dandelion is in pretty much tack sharp focus. She's clearly moving quite a bit. She discovers she does not like the feeling or taste of dandelion fuzz all over her face and in her mouth. And yeah, again, there maybe a little bit of a sneeze beginning to happen in this image. But I mean, okay, yeah, this is a picture of a little puppy moving all over the place, and it did as good a job as any phone I have. I will tell you right now that had I done this on my Z Fold, there is more shutter lag, and this would have been way more out of focus, and I would not have captured this on a way more expensive, better phone camera device. When I look at images like this, do I look back and do I think to myself, boy, I wish I had a different camera on me, a different phone in my pocket to have taken these pictures? No, I don't, because Duo did a really good job on all of these images. Now, while I'm not seeing a massive difference in general photographic performance on Surface Duo 2 after the Android 12 update, one area that I'm seeing a really big uplift is in low light photography. Like, I'm talking a massive improvement, at least in my brief sampling here so far. Let me show you this really quickly. This was a picture I took in some low light earlier before that 12L update launched. And yes, it looks really, really bad. It is blurry. You pretty much can't read Samsung there if we're being honest. This is the same image taken with a Gcam port. Notice that it is a ton better. And this had been the solution for a really long time. It goes black for some reason, but there we go. Look how much more legible that is. The exact same lighting. Now let me show you what the stock camera did after the Android 12L update. It is like 90% as good. It might be over brightened if I'm saying anything, but that is a massive improvement. There's still some grain. Look, I still think the Gcam picture is better. I think it's more natural. There's less grain, but oh my goodness, is that a world of improvement from where it used to be. Now let's look at a video sample and see how bad that actually is. As I mentioned, video on Surface Duo 2 is definitely the weakest part of the photographic experience, and no amount of Gcam can seem to fix it. Stabilization is effectively non-existent. It is extremely jittery, just not very good at all. Now, colors and details are actually not half bad, but this stabilization, oh my goodness, is it terrible. So another place like that stabilization where Duo 2 maybe is not as great as you would want it to be is with battery life. Coming from a device like the Pixel 7 Pro where the battery has been very, very, very good, like 6+ hours of screen time, no problem at all. Back to Duo 2, yeah, you're going to be plugging the thing in a little bit more. I probably get, still, like I said earlier, between 4 and 6 hours of screen time. If you really push the thing, you're a heavy user, you're going to be plugging it in during the day. Now, one of the ways, if I can speak correctly, that I kind of get around this is with an accessory like my Duo dock. When I'm sitting here at my desk, I just plop my Duo down in this thing, and if I want to use it, it's right there for me to use, but it's also charging at the same time, and it just kind of lives right there at all times. So my experience is basically that. When I get in my car, I put it in my car dock, and I just instinctively plug it in wherever I go. And when I do that, I wind up using my device probably 4 to 6 hours during the course of the day with the screen on, and I'm going to bed with like 50 or 60% battery left because this is my workflow. This is how I do things. If you're never near a charger, it's going to be a bit more of a stretch for you. If you're going to push for 5 hours of screen time and no charging, you're going to be on fumes when you make it to the end of the day. And if you're in an area with bad coverage, bad cellular coverage, it may be considerably worse than that. I would give battery life something like a 6 out of 10. It is okay. It's not fantastic. It's not terrible. Okay is probably a pretty good descriptive term. You may have noticed we've gotten really far into this video and we've not talked about bugs yet. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The biggest one is just that the bugs I experience are pretty few and far between and are really not that serious. Now, I will talk about the ones I do experience, and they are somewhat annoying at some points. Also, keep in mind that Android 12L has just come out. So, the prevalency of these bugs is yet undetermined. I don't know if these things have been addressed or not, if new bugs have been introduced. We are still experiencing this new Android 12L update. I have not personally seen an increase in frequency of bugs, and in fact, I've not yet actually seen the bugs I'm talking about. So they may be fixed. I don't know. It's really hard to say. The software changes on this thing like every month, so you're just going to have to deal with this snapshot in time of my experience. So the first one is probably the one that happens the most frequently for me and is probably the most annoying. And it's basically the launcher becoming temporarily unresponsive. Maybe I'm already in an app and I want to launch another app and I'm tapping away and it just doesn't respond. Usually it then starts to respond after a couple of seconds. Sometimes I'll need to long press and clear my recent app. Sometimes I just lock it and unlock it. It is annoying and it does happen. It maybe happens to me once a day, maybe twice a day right now. It actually has gotten worse. This was not that big of a problem for me. It's happening more often now. Occasionally, apps in general will just kind of bog down and the thing needs to be rebooted. This probably needs to happen every 2 or 3 days. It'll just start to run a little sluggish. There may be a RAM leak or something going on there that just causes it to bog down. It's not the end of the world. A reboot does seem to fix that problem for me. Another interesting one. Let's say I'm going to click on this image here. Sometimes you'll click on something on an app and it'll actually launch the app behind what you were just trying to tap through the application. It'll launch that app on top and you're like, what just happened? You go back and there's your Twitter app again. That happens to me every once in a while, maybe once or twice a week. That seems to actually have gotten better for me. I would say that Duo still does have a little bit lackluster, just overall touch response. So typing can sometimes be a little bit annoying. And I hear a lot of people complain about typing on Duo too. For me, it's not that bad. And it might just be because I'm terrible at typing on glass anyways, but like, I was terrible at typing on my Pixel 7 Pro. I was terrible at typing on my Z Fold 4, wherever I've set that thing. I'm terrible at typing on glass, period. So I use the speech to text almost exclusively. So maybe that's something that's going to be a bigger problem for some. It's bad for me everywhere. So is it worse than on other phones? Maybe. I really can't say, though. I want to make this part perfectly clear. While I can go to my community page here on YouTube and I can show you polling that I've done through the course, the history of Surface Duo's lifespan, with each update almost there for a while. And I can show you data that shows very clearly hundreds and now thousands of people saying that their experience has slowly improved. And now the majority of people, if they rank their Duo 2 experience 1 to 5, 5 being the worst phone they've ever used, it's unusable, and 5 being absolutely perfect. The majority of people rate their Duo a 4, with 3 and 5 coming in second and third, and then very few people rating this phone a 1 or a 2. I'm not trying to say that if you've had problems with your Duo 2 that you don't exist, that your problems aren't legitimate, that it's your fault, any of these things. I'm simply saying the majority of people rate their experience a 4 out of 5, and that's pretty much where I'm at. It's not a perfect phone, but it is very, very good, and you have to consider this. My overhead camera right now is my Pixel 7 Pro. If I pull this down, there's the end of it there. I'm not putting my SIM in that. I have a Z Fold 4 right over there. I just took my SIM out of it and put it back on my Duo. If my Duo was this buggy mess, if it was this unusable buggy mess that some people on the internet want you to believe it is, why would I do that? What kind of masochist would I have to be to do that? I'm not doing that. I'm putting my SIM back in a phone that is roundabout as buggy as either one of those two phones are. It's got a couple of problems. Maybe it's a little bit more buggy than those two phones. Maybe it's 20% more buggy than those phones. It's not enough to deter me because I still enjoy using that device. Having those two screens, when I don't have it here or I don't have it there, I feel limited. I feel constricted or restricted is maybe a better word to use. And as soon as I'm back on my Duo, even with those few problems here and there, I just feel more at home. It feels more natural to me. It feels easier to use. It works better with my brain. So I forego a couple of really, really great phones to use Surface Duo. You can assume that I'm crazy, or you can just assume that for some people this is going to be the case. Duo 2 is just a really good fit for me. The camera's good enough. The performance is good enough. I just really like Surface Duo. So yeah, there you go. There's my 1-year review of Surface Duo 2. I really like it. It has gotten better over time for the most part. The camera is better. The performance is better. Most bugs are better. There's a couple that have gotten worse, but in general, the bugginess is better. Touch response is considerably better than at launch. It is one of my favorite devices of all time, and it is once again my primary device, at least until I have to review the next phone. Guys, if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe. I will see you on the next one, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.